You're listening to The Pilot's Portfolio, formerly called the Pilot Money Podcast. To learn more about the name change, join us in Season 2.
I've been flying for the airlines for almost 8 years. As a young FO, I saw a lot of these senior captains, and they're making great money, like insane amounts of money, right? But they're talking and acting like when they retire, they're going to have to live in a van down by the river, and they're going to starve to death in a couple of years because they're out of money. And they're always complaining, I don't have any money.
You're listening to the Pilot Money Podcast, the show dedicated to guiding professional pilots towards a future of financial success and stability. Fly along with your host, Timothy P. Pope, as he provides financial planning insights and answers to your burning questions and dives into real-life stories from fellow pilots who share their successes and cautionary tales. The Pilot Money Podcast takes off now.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Pilot Money Podcast. I'm excited you are joining us. Welcome aboard. Of course, my name is Timothy P. Pope. I'm a certified financial planner who specializes in the needs of the professional pilot. Thank everybody for your engagement on that last solo episode, Holding Short of Impulse Buying. I've got a couple of comments on that. On the socials, Nick Fialka, you'll remember Nick, him and Anna were just on the show just a little while ago. Nick said that Anna won't let him get a fifth motorcycle. So, well, Nick, I got to say, after hearing the wallpaper story, don't know if I can blame Anna, but keep trying. Maybe she'll relent and let you get that fifth motorcycle. Troy chimed in. He said, what helps with impulse buying regret when it comes to motorcycles is just use it a lot. Okay. All right. I see what you're saying there, Troy. You know, I'm sure that works. I didn't get a chance to experience that myself because, as you guys heard in that last episode, I didn't buy the motorcycle. And if you're just joining us, if you haven't listened to episode 11, Holding Short of Impulse Buying, give it a listen. And I share with you the surprise that I felt when touring a motorcycle store at just the strong urge to go ahead and buy a motorcycle that I had not planned for. So listen to that episode, and I share what ultimately happened and the process I went through to hold myself back. All right, we got another comment here. It says, L. Wills, it says, Motorcycles and Tools, What a Man podcast. Well, you have to assume there from that comment that L. Wills is a woman. So first and foremost, thank you, L. Wills, for your contribution, and thank you for following along and your support of the show. It's actually interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I was meeting with my editor, and he was showing me some numbers, and he said, hey, Tim, I think it was like 93% of our listeners are men, which means the 7% are women. And he says, well, hey, like this is pretty skewed. And I said, well, my audience is the professional pilot, and quite frankly, that perfectly reflects the general professional pilot population. I'd be concerned if it was 50-50. But that does bring up a good and an interesting point, right? So I was looking at a 2022 FAA report just about women in aviation, and 4.6 of the pilots who hold an ATP are women, so just under 5% there. And then 7.4% of pilots who hold their commercial rating are women. So it brings up an interesting point. Ladies, we want to hear from you. So, what concerns do you have when it comes to your financial success and stability? What questions do you have? How has your career impacted your family's finances? We'd love to hear that. So send us a note. pilotmoneypodcast@ceterainvestors.com. Who do you want to hear from as a guest? What topics are important to you as it relates to your financial journey? And then what specific questions come to mind thinking about your financial situation? I know as a planner, a lot of times there are some similarities when planning for women. I mean, sometimes we think about, or we hear, hey, I've taken time off to raise kids. And then, so, you see an impact on career earnings. Sometimes, and this is a This is always a tough one. But if, a lady was not involved in the financial decisions and then a death or divorce happened, right? You have all of this kind of, laid in your lap at once. So that could be something else. When sometimes caring for parents, right? That could be another career disruption. All of these are real things. They're all things that we deal with and help clients work around from the financial perspective. So thank you to the 6 to 7% of women pilots that are participating in the show or following along. We want to hear from you. So thank you, L. Wills, for your comment and bringing that up. In today's episode, we have a special guest for you, and I'm excited about this conversation because in the lead up of the launch of this podcast, I asked many of our clients, hey, if you were to listen to a show like this, what would you like to hear? And quite frankly, I received so many great pieces of feedback, and it's going to take time to implement that and bring you the people that you want to hear and also the content. But one of the answers that I heard was, hey, I'd love to hear from a pilot who has walked through or is going through what I'm going through, but is now also financially successful. And so today we have that conversation. Today we have a conversation with Jason DePew. You may have read his book, Pilot Math, Treasure Bath. You may have seen his blog post online or on LinkedIn. You may have heard his thoughts on the Engage podcast, the podcast for Delta pilots. So we're very excited to have Jason on the show today. So let's jump in to this conversation. Hey, Jason, welcome to the Pilot Money Podcast.
Thanks, Tim. So nice to be here.
Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. You are a man of many hats, a captain at a major airline, a published author, a blogger, an Excel aficionado as well. So all around personal finance guru. So I'm excited to chat with you.
Thanks. I don't know if I qualify for the title of guru, but I try to help out where I can.
Well, we're going to dig into that. Well, let's do this. Obviously, since this is the Pilot Money Podcast, talk to us about your aviation background and where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I started as an Air Force pilot. I flew B-1s and Pilatus PC-12s and top pilot training in the Air Force. And after about 11 years of that, decided to settle down a bit and moved on to a major airline. And I've flown a bunch of different things there right now. Right now I'm flying the 737 as a captain out of New York. And then I do a lot of general aviation flying. I teach in the Icon A5. I like tailwheel flying. And I recently got a Pipistrel Sinus that I fly with my kids and my wife. And it's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think I knew about the Icon A5. When you fly that, where are you usually flying?
Well, we have a training center in Tampa. So I live in Tampa and it's close, so it's easy to go there. But a lot of what they do, they have a factory authorized instructor network, a lot like Cirrus does. And so they'll call me up and say, hey, do you want to spend a week in Key West flying the Icon? And I'm like, oh, I guess so.
Maybe.
Yeah. And so I'll go to wherever the owner is and fly with them and just, teach seaplane flying in their area. And it's a blast. It's so fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, Tampa, you've got a lot of water options. To go. And then this is just so I'm in Charlotte. We've got Lake Norman, and I think there's a seaplane base around here somewhere. I don't have a seaplane rating, so I don't know. But just like the takeoff and landing distances for the Icon, like what is it?
Low altitude on a cool day, you're looking at 600 to 1,000 feet, definitely under 1,000 feet. At high density altitudes, and in Colorado in the summer, it's a long way, but 1,000 feet. So it's surprisingly capable. It's really good.
That's really interesting. So less than 1,000 feet, low altitude, cool day. So I look at the lake and I'm like, I wonder,
oh yeah,
you could probably take off from there. So I'm sure we could talk about that all day. So, I asked you to come on the show you're well known as it comes to personal finance and discussing the things of financial independence. So what was your journey or your path to say, hey, you know what? I want to be financially independent. Let me figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, I looked out and married a great woman. She has always been a saver and a frugal person and an investor. So when we got married, our game plan was we are uncomfortable every year until we have maxed out our IRAs and our TSP or 401k, get those investments going. Once that's done, then we can, spend some money if we want to, but we've got to take care of the basics. Over the years, I just passing interest in investing and trying to maximize what I'm getting out of my money. And every once in a while, I'd read news articles about this blogger named Mr. Money Mustache. And these were all, mainstream news articles talking about this guy. They made him sound like a scam. It's like, I would always read it very skeptically. Like, who is this bozo with this dumb name, right? And finally, one day I went to his website and read some of his articles. And there's this one article called the Shockingly Simple Math Behind Early Retirement. And it's one of those things that's like learning a new language. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And he boils everything down to make it so simple that if you set the correct rate between spending and saving based on what you make, you can reach a point where very early in your life, you could retire if you want. You could never work another day and you'd be able to support your family. And to me, it's like, how could I not pursue that goal? That just makes so much sense. So I started diving in and figuring out how to make that happen.
So you said earlier, and I think this is important, you said, hey, I was lucky and I married an incredibly bright woman. Was before you guys met, were you just as strong of a saver as she was?
I was pretty strong still. She's always been better than me. She's smarter, better looking, more talented, all of it. But I was also a good saver, though. I had already, started the IRA and the TSP and everything else in the Air Force. So we were both on the same page when we met.
Okay. So there was no behavioral change that had to happen for you guys to get on this road. You were already naturally curious about it and interested.
Yeah, not a lot for us. I guess that's a blessing or lucky or whatever that we were kind of raised that way to not care so much about keeping up with the Joneses, what other people are doing. Let's take care of ourselves and go from there.
That's probably a topic of an entirely different episode, but the way that we're raised, we know what we know. The examples that we see around us have a huge impact on what we start to do with our first dollars when we're earning. So, you guys were fortunate. This investing and saving wasn't new to you. So you went to Mr. Money Mustache's website. You said you saw some things that you couldn't unsee. What was that?
It's just this very simple math. If you want to be able to retire, you need to have enough money where you can cover your spending needs every year with about 4% of your nest egg. And so it's very simple to just take whatever your annual spending is, multiply it by 25, divide by 4%, and that's how much money you need to retire. And I don't plan to retire early. I'm going to keep flying for the airlines because I love it. It's great living. But it is unbelievably comforting to know that if the airline stopped being fun, or if, God forbid, I lost my medical or something happened, the next COVID pandemic, if I had to walk away, my family would be fine. Our needs would be taken care of forever. That reduces so much stress in your life. It's wonderful.
What kind of sacrifices, or did you have to make any sacrifices at all to implement this plan? Because you say, hey, the math is easy, and we hear it all the time. Hey, this concept, it's simple, but if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Yeah.
So talk to me about what sacrifices did your family make, or did you make any sacrifices to implement?
We didn't drive really new fancy cars. We didn't buy the biggest house we could afford. We didn't send our kids to private school. I'm not into, watches or fancy clothes or, anything like that, expensive booze. So sure, we sacrificed those things, I suppose. For us, it was just the mindset of we value more the security for our future. And it's interesting, when you're a poor college student, you find ways to have fun, right? You go out on the weekends and you do something and it's fun. You might go hiking, you might, play pickup football in the courtyard, whatever, and you have a great time. And as we get older and we start making more money, we fall into the trap of thinking, oh, I have to spend money to enjoy my life. And it's not true. Absolutely wrong. So I guess my wife have just been maybe easy to please and found lots of ways to enjoy life that didn't cost so much. And then it's interesting, once you reach that inflection point where you've kind of reached financial independence, then if you do want to spend more, you can. And you realize really quickly, oh, you can afford that. And it doesn't stretch your finances at all. And it's kind of a nice luxury to be able to have. And what other people are using debt to do in their lives, you can just do with your regular income without impacting your future and your savings.
Right. So it doesn't sound like you made a ton of sacrifices because your taste were, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a sacrifice if you didn't, want it and enjoy it in the first place. So who knows whether that was a product of how you were brought up and the things that you saw around you, or just you as a person, right? So I think those two things, early introduction to saving, and then also what you put your value on, those have put you many steps ahead probably of most people. And that's what we see as we work with pilots as well. Let's talk about this. I mean, because you don't look very old.
I'm not that old. I'm 43.
43. Okay. So, and you already said that, look, if you lost your medical today, your family's needs would be met forever. How long did that take?
For us, it didn't take too long. My wife also works, so it was really quick.
Okay, dual income. All right, that's an important note.
Dual income. So, thinking through it, it might have been, when we really put effort into it, maybe 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the math, if you look at the charts, pretty much anybody on a single family income, as long as you're spending intelligently, could get this done in 7 to 10 years, no problem. And that's why the math is so powerful. It's for anybody.
So it doesn't take a long time.
It's not get rich quick, right? Where our world is obsessed with get rich quick schemes and I've got to be flashy and look cool now. No, it does take 5, 7, 10 years for some people, it'll be sacrifice. For some people, it will be hard work. But in my opinion, 10 years of moderately hard work is totally worth it for a lifetime of financial security.
Absolutely. And I think that is another important thing to note. It doesn't take a long time. It's not a get rich quick, but it does require some discipline.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what made you so excited? Because I on LinkedIn, right, your tag is helping pilots enjoy great careers, sometimes in spite of themselves. So what made you excited moving from learning everything you could about Mr. Money Mustache to then being maybe a pilot personal finance evangelist, if you will, spreading the good word of, hey, you could do this too, and it's not that hard?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. The first is there's another blogger and podcaster who goes by the handle the Mad Fientist, and he's written some articles about having conversations with his wife about what would our ideal life look like. And at first she wasn't on board with this idea of saving a lot of their money and saving for the future until he had that conversation with her. And when she saw that, it was like, oh, that makes sense. Let's work toward that. And so for me and my wife, we're kind of the same way. We have a vision of what we want our life to look like in the future. And that's really what got us excited. But then when I got to the airlines, I've been flying for the airlines for almost 8 years. As a young FO, I saw a lot of these senior captains, and they're making great money, insane amounts of money, right? But they're talking and acting like when they retire, they're going to have to live in a van down by the river and they're going to starve to death in a couple of years because they're out of money. And they're always complaining, I don't have any money. And then they start talking about the decisions they've made in life and the things they've spent their money on. I'm like, well, there's your problem, dude. And so I felt like it would be good to put out some ideas that might help them, and also to help my compadres, my peers, not become like that, to not end up like that at the end of their careers. Since I've upgraded to captain, I fly with almost exclusively new hires in New York because nobody wants to go to New York.
Right.
I've started flying with some new hires who are really kind of living on the razor's edge of their finances and counting their chickens really closely. And, as soon as year 2 pay, I'm going to start spending on this. And year 3 pay, I'm going to spend on this. I worry about that mindset continuing in future generations. I feel like having seen this shockingly simple math, having understood how relatively simple and relatively quick it is to reach this point of financial independence, I want to make sure other pilots get that information.
So as I mentioned, your LinkedIn tagline is helping pilots enjoy great careers, sometimes in spite of themselves.
Uh-huh.
What do you see pilots tripping up on? What is that in spite of themselves part? Because that sounds really juicy.
I mean, there's so many different areas, right? I'm prey to it. I'm sure you're prey to it. We're all prey to it. Pilots, we like toys, right? We like fancy airplanes. We like our boats and our cars and everything else. And just because I don't buy the fanciest cars or watches or whatever, doesn't mean I don't like them. It's really easy for us pilots to say, oh, I'm making this huge amount of money with my airline income, but I go spend it. What toys can I spend it on, right? I see that tripping up a lot of people. I do see pilots chasing these advanced level investments or alternative investments or speculation, right? Which is not investing, it's speculation. And if you want to speculate, that's fine after everything else is taken care of. But I see pilots, young pilots jumping into the speculative ventures without having the foundation set first. I feel like sometimes we tell ourselves these little lies. Some pilots talk about flying passengers as flying cargo, and they have one reason that one is better than the other, and they live and die by these principles. But if you look at it, it's kind of silly. It really isn't as clean cut as they make it out to be. So I like trying to get pilots to question their assumptions and question the things they've been hearing as rote catchphrases, and try to think through things instead.
That last point, because the first one was, hey, I can float the note, so I can afford the toy. The second one was, you know what, I may not have a financial foundation, nor may I have the financial knowledge, but I'm going to get into something sophisticated, maybe over my head. That third one you're saying is that folks have these strong-held opinions or positions that are not supported by math. And so they might be leaving something on the table if they would open their eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, in a world of TikTok and instant gratification and, everybody on social media looks like they're just killing it, how has your message been received?
I don't do, short clips. I don't do quick hits. It's kind of a weakness of mine. I couldn't write a 500-word article to save my life. I kind of do deep dives into a subject, and I try to really back myself up with sources and with math, with pilot math, right? And show empirically how these things work. And I've got a lot of good feedback from it. Maybe it isn't as appealing or as widespread as it could be if I was flashier or more mainstream about it. But I feel like the message is well received.
You have a normal bell curve, right? You're always going to have folks that are on the one end where to save their life, they may not be able to make the change, a behavioral change. And then you're going to have the other folks on the other end that are just naturally good at it. Maybe it was the way they were brought up, maybe a spousal influence, right? So you're not moving in two different directions. And then you got a lot of people in the middle where, you know what, if they have access to the information and maybe there's some encouragement in some way, maybe it's a financial planner, maybe it's a buddy or what have you, hey, they could be set up to make some great choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned either personally or in your work and helping other pilots as you started on your journey of financial independence?
That's a good question. One of the things I feel like I've learned is a lot of people, when they discover this idea of financial independence, they get really excited about it and they want to do just what everybody else has done and start a blog and write about it, right? And I kind of started down that path and I realized I was just trying to rehash things that other people had said much better than I could. And so for me, what worked was tailoring my message. And so I really targeted pilots because I'd already been writing kind of aviation news topics for pilots online for a while. So there was already kind of an audience there, an understanding of my peers. And then I was able to just kind of work financial topics into that. And I already had at least a little bit of credibility among those peers. And so it helped to kind of reach the people where you're at. And I have been impressed with how many pilots are making good decisions. And a lot of the feedback you get is, yeah, dude, obviously, duh. And that's great. That's what I love to hear, right? There are lots of pilots on that path. So I don't feel like I'm obligated to change the world, to get the entire industry converted today to these ideas. I feel like if I just chip away at it here and there, it's going to spread. Other people are reading my stuff, or they're hearing other stuff through word of mouth, or just they're seeing the examples of all their peers out there who are doing the right things. I feel like we're doing enough.
Oh, that's right. I think that there is a huge opportunity for just financial education in general. They don't teach us in high school,
yes,
right? Just in general. But because of what pilots are earning right now, I think that, there's a tremendous personal, maybe obligation. I don't think that's too strong, but this personal responsibility, like, hey, be a good steward of of this opportunity that you have,
yes,
right? And you're part of spreading that message, So Jason, one thing, I talk to a lot of pilots as a certified financial planner, right? And sometimes we hear, hey, I was flying with this captain or I was flying with so-and-so, and they're doing this exotic financial transaction, right? And we want in too. So what say ye to that crowd, having, achieved your financial independence? I think you said in 5 to 7 years? What did you do? What did Jason do? And what do you say to those folks?
Yeah, to those folks, I say good luck with that. There's better ways. Shockingly simple math. The charts that prove it are based on stock market returns of 5%. And if you look at the long-term return of the stock market, it's about 10.5%. So I feel like that's very conservative. So if all you ever did was invest in the whole stock market by a low-cost, passive index fund, that's the total stock market of the S&P 500, something like that, and just let it ride, you can achieve your goals in a shockingly short amount of time, right? There's a famous anecdote that Vanguard once looked at which of their investors have the best returns, and it turns out that the people who did best, got the best performance, were dead because they didn't change things in their account ever. And you lose the most money when you see the market drop, and so you panic and you sell. And then you try to time the market and buy back, and you're always going to miss that bottom. And the people who try to be active like that do worse every time.
Absolutely.
So for me, my fundamental premise is maximize contributions to tax-advantaged accounts. IRAs, TSP, 401k, HSA, 529 plans, anything like that. Maximize those contributions and set it and forget it in a low-fee passive index fund. And just let it ride. And like we talked about, it's not going to be get rich quick, but you don't need it to be. Hopefully you're going to be healthy and working possibly till age 65 as an airline pilot, 30 or 40 years for that money to grow. There's plenty of time. And then for me, as I upgraded to captain and my income increased and we're able to easily max out our retirement accounts every year, now we've got extra cash sitting around. And we're like, well, what are we going to do with this? We don't want to spend it because that's not who we are. Well, now we've started to look into just some kinds of alternative investments, and we've gotten into real estate. We bought a rental property. We did all the rehab ourselves. It was a really fun, difficult, but fun project. I started buying into some real estate syndications, and there's other things out there that are really great opportunities. But in order to do those effectively and safely, I feel like a person has to get some education.
100%. Sometimes I will send people to different sources and say, hey, go check this out. Go check that out.
Yeah.
And if they come with a baseline knowledge of finance and personal finance and investing, then it's palatable. They can understand and digest the message. If there's not that baseline knowledge, you might as well be speaking like, Greek or another foreign language. So that's just listening to the information. The same is true when actually you're trying to make a good decision of whether I should invest in this or not, or how to invest in something that's more complicated. So you didn't say this, but I've got to ask, did you start getting into more complicated deals after you had reached what you consider the financial independence?
Yes, absolutely. We got 100% passive index funds kind of thing. We did have a family financial planner. He worked with my father-in-law. So, my wife, signed on with him for a little bit, and he manages some of our money. But most of our savings is in just passive index funds. It really wasn't until we'd hit that point of financial independence that we started branching out.
What I'm hearing is hey, crawl before you walk before you run. Because the thing that, everybody looks at, more complicated financial transactions, hey, the payoff may be greater, but there's also a lot more risk involved, right? And you need a really solid baseline before you start jumping into more risky assets. And then the other thing too is, as a financial planner, I'm all about, hey, let's get into real estate. There's a lot of different ways you can do it.
Yes.
There's tax benefits that you can do it, right? And I think that from a planning perspective, these things ought not be overlooked. But I always want my clients to be ready to be able to take advantage of that.
And realistically, I kind of, dove into this world maybe in 2016, 2017. I really started thinking about the whole financial independence movement stuff. It wasn't until really like 2022 that we bought a rental property as a short-term rental. And even a little bit after, late 2022, early 2023 that we started doing real estate syndications. So I spent a good 6 or 7 years educating myself on real estate investing before I really dove into it seriously. And I think that's a reasonable amount of time. So in the meantime, invest your money somewhere else. Invest in the stock market. It's simple, it's easy, it's passive. Let it grow. And if you get to a point where you want to transition some of that money into real estate, it'll be there and it will have grown for you, which is great. But don't, like you said, put the cart before the horse. Don't rush into something you're not prepared for. Take time to get that education. In the meantime, your money will still be growing.
That's right. Sometimes you come across folks that are bad-mouthing the tried and the true. Or maybe, hey, this seems too simple to work, right? Like I need a little extra, flavor or sophistication. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that will, hey, if that's what you want, I'll sell it to you.
Yeah.
And that may not necessarily be the best thing for the client. So Jason, you wrote a book. Tell us about what prompted you to write the book and tell us about what they're going to learn whenever they read the book.
Yeah. So when I discovered the financial independence movement, I kind of followed that same path I talked about. I got really excited. I wanted to write about it and spread the word. And then I realized I didn't want to just rehash what other people were doing. So I felt like I needed to target my message. I could reach pilots. And so I started thinking, I'll write some blog articles about this because I'm used to doing that. But as I looked more and more about it, it really has to be a holistic approach to this whole ideology kind of from start to finish. You can't really take it in pieces and it'll make sense. So I wanted to present it in a format where you had to take the whole thing. You had to consume the whole thing and then sit there and think about it a little bit. And a book was really the right medium to do that. It forces the pilot to start with the basic ideas and the premise behind it, see the math, see how quickly it can be achieved, and then talk about why we're doing this, what your goals are, what you can achieve with this kind of approach to finance.
That's fantastic, especially, hey, this works. It's not a get rich quick. It does require some discipline. And you can set your own pace. on your journey. You could set your own pace because everybody comes from a different background. Like some folks are going to be coming with the baggage of debt, right? Or some folks are going to wake up to this concept after a divorce and maybe they're remarried or whatever life throws at you, right? And so you can set your own pace along this. I really like that. And then you challenge people to think about your why, which we run into all the time, because compensation right now is really fantastic in the airlines. So folks are looking at from the business aviation side, wanting to jump in or vice versa, or, hey, should I upgrade? Or should I, I was reading some of your work on, hey, I make more than, or just as much as a Delta captain, right? Like, so some of those decision points. And I think anchoring yourself with your why is really important. So then you and your family can make decisions that are appropriate for you.
Yes.
In addition to your book, though, you also write blog articles, and a lot of times these are accompanied by really neat calculators. Talk to us about that. I've used a number of your calculators, and I've looked at them. So talk to us about what you're doing there and why you do it.
Yeah, I think so much in our world, we talk about truth or fake news, right? And there's so many people in the world willing to just throw out ideas without adequate support, without adequate documentation. And it's very easy for people to believe that and get carried away, not having examined an idea to decide for themselves whether it is supported or not. And so I feel it's very important for me as a writer and for anybody as a pilot to look through the math underlying any idea, right? And so, I hear people say, oh, I make as much as a Delta captain, or, oh, I make more money by not upgrading than if I did. That's awesome. If that's what you want to do, go for it. But let's look at the math and check that work and make sure. And so I like to throw that out. I also, I have some assumptions. A lot of the new airline contracts are adding a new retirement vehicle called a market-based cash balance plan. There's some advantages to it. There's also some big disadvantages. When I first heard about it, I was strongly against it. I was like, this is horrible. This is awful. I don't want this at all. I'm going to no vote a contract that has this. And then I thought to myself, well, let's at least run the math. So I built a calculator on that. And I surprised myself by saying that in many cases, it's advantageous to invest in that because of tax incentives despite low investment returns. And it was a fascinating study. So I kind of do this to prove stuff to myself or test my own theories. And I feel like it's useful for other people too. So I like to share it out there.
It's so useful. I run into this as a planner. A client will bring me a question and I'm listening to the question, or it might come through email. And in my mind, I say, I think we're probably going to go this route, this route, and this route.
Yeah.
And then we pause, we run the numbers, and I've totally been, hey, you know what? I thought we were going to go this way, but for you and your circumstance, we need to do something alternative. And I think to your point, it's really important for folks to look at that. I mean, one of the more recent things was the VUL.
Yeah.
And for Delta pilots, which, by the way, not all airlines have that specific tax benefit.
No, they don't.
Yes. One of my clients brought that to me, and oh my God, just because the way insurance salespeople are, and I had a total bias against it. And then I'm like, you know what? Let me dig down. Let me learn more about this. And then when I learned that the imputed income benefit and that Delta's premiums are the cost basis. Now, I see that, and it still frustrates me, the investments that they have inside of that thing. I mean, that still frustrates me. But the whole point of this is you do the research and you stay open until the research is completed, and then you make your decisions.
That's right.
And that's what you're doing for the people. You're putting this in their hands.
Yes. I'm a math and science guy. My undergrad is engineering. And so for me, it's the scientific method, right? Form a theory, then go test it. And your goal is not to confirm your theory. Your goal is to try as hard as you can to prove your theory false. You're never proving it true. You're only ever failing to disprove your theory for now. That's why I like these calculators. That's what you can do. You can go, stress test an idea and see if it works. And if somebody can prove otherwise, awesome. That's wonderful. Let's do it. Let's prove it wrong, but let's do it with hard facts, with math.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you've written the book, you've got the blog. I read Flying. I see your byline in there. You write for Flying and other publications. Any new projects you've got coming down the pipe?
I'm working on a lot of books. I've got some fiction, some nonfiction. I am working on a second edition of Pilot Math Treasure Bath, my book. For the first version, I went with perfect is the enemy of done and went with done. So it's imperfect. The editing is not wonderful. And there's a couple things in there that I really need to adjust. Also, since I published it, the COVID pandemic happened, the world fell apart. It's now getting put back together, and the landscape is very different. And inflation has risen, but earnings have also skyrocketed for airline pilots. So there's a lot of edits and updates to do in there. So I'm looking forward to putting that out.
Well, when you do, definitely let us know. I'm looking forward to reading the second edition whenever you finish that. In the meantime, where can folks follow you, read your work, use the calculators? Do you have to pay to use the calculators?
No, they're all free. I'm not charging for any of it. I publish all this stuff on pilotmathtreasurebath.com. It's a stupid blog name on purpose to make sure we're not taking ourselves too seriously. So head over there. If you do that /blog, it's whatever my newest articles are. I've got it set up to automatically spam out on LinkedIn anytime I publish an article. And then I have a Facebook page under that name that also notifies you anytime an article comes out.
So folks can find you pilotmathtreasurebath.com for the blog work. They can buy the book of the same name. They can find you on LinkedIn. So you're out there. So look them up, folks. If you want to get smart about a pilot who has already done it. Matter of fact, this is interesting because before we launched the show, we were telling our current clients, hey, we're launching the Pilot Money podcast for you guys, for professional pilots. What would you want to hear? Some of the things that we heard is like, hey, we would want to hear from a pilot who has walked the walk and who has already done it. And so I think the listeners are in for a great treat for this episode. So Jason DePew, everybody, captain at a major airline, published author, blogger, GA pilot, military, commercial flying. He's done it all. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Well, and that brings us to the debrief section. The first thing that I want us to think about is know your number, right? Jason made this point. He said, if you want to be able to retire, you need to have enough money where you can cover what your spending needs are every year. Okay, so let's assume that you're a professional pilot at the airlines. You're going to retire at 65, and let's say that you'll last until 85 or 90. That's 20 to 25 years, right? So you'll need to have enough money to cover your expenses for 20 to 25 years. And here's the thing. Will things change? Absolutely. Will you change? Will your taste change? Will, the abilities to do certain things change? 100%. But it's really important from a planning perspective to understand, hey, what am I spending now? How might that change? And then how much of that will I need to replace in retirement? And even in retirement, the way you spend changes, right? In those early years, I call them the go-go years, right? You still have your health, hopefully, and your abilities. And then you start to slow down, right? I call them the slow-go years. And then there at the end, there's the no-go years, right? And so things will change. However, healthcare costs might go up, where vacation costs might go down, kind of thing. And so, it's really good to understand what you are spending today and how much of that you're going to need to replace. Now, if you are 10 to 15 years from retirement, that number is critically important. It increasingly gets more important, is what I'm trying to say, as time goes on, every day, right? So if you're 10 to 15 years out. If you're 25 to 30 years out, I think the most important thing is for you to develop a good savings habit. And the right understanding is, hey, I'm going to have to replace what I spend with some kind of income. Also, if you're 25 to 30 years out, good luck counting on, Social Security. We always discount that for our clients, right? If you're under the age of 50, we're discounting that by 30%. So we'll see what happens there in the future. Now, for those that are 25 to 30 years out, it may seem like a really long time until you have to retire. But I'm telling you, the earlier you start, the easier it will be. And you'll have time to compound your contributions. But it's really, really hard to catch up on the backside. So do me a favor, if you're 25 to 30 years out, just go talk to a senior captain that you fly with and ask them, how quickly did it go? All right, so that's number one, know your number. The second thing that I want you to think about in today's debrief is the fact that getting organized and obtaining financial independence does not take a long time, but it does take discipline. There was a point in the conversation where Jason said he had a mindset of valuing more the security of his future than valuing all the things that he could currently spend his money on. I want you to think about that. That's a powerful statement, right? That's a powerful mindset. The security of his future was more important than all the things that he could potentially spend the money on. Now, if you take that mindset and you take it and you acknowledge that, hey, getting organized and obtaining financial independence does not have to take a long time, what happens is you get to a point where you can start to enjoy all the things that you might have previously said no to, all the things that you might have sacrificed for on your route to your financial independence. But the difference is, as you enjoy them, you're doing it with cash flow as opposed to borrowed money, right? As opposed to debt. And that is an extremely valuable position to be in. So it doesn't take a long time, but try to avoid getting in your own way, right? Try to stick to whatever your plan is, stick to it, fund it, stick with the investments if they're working, right? We want to avoid jumping in and jumping out and just in general doing things that could frustrate or lengthen that time frame of obtaining financial independence. There's a lot of specifics that you can't control when it comes to investments and the economy, your airline. You can't control how the economy is going to do, right? You can't control if your airline gets in trouble or only uses one supplier and then has to reduce out. You can't control all this stuff. But some of the most important aspects of your financial future, you can control. And some things that come to mind is, how much you spend, how much you save, how you invest, right? Your investment behavior, I already mentioned, are you jumping in and out? Are you allowing the market to work for you and not disturbing the magic that is compound interest? How diversified are you, right? Are we putting all of our eggs in one basket? Or are we spreading out the risk? So these things that you can control, embrace them all and, fully embrace all the things that you can control, leave nothing to chance. And then, because there's plenty of chance and randomness and luck or bad fortune, all the way around, all the things that we can't control. Those things exist, but let's be 100% in the driver's seat about the things that we can do. The third point that I want you to think about in this debrief is a simple plan can be highly effective. Investors tend to think that higher complexity equals higher expected returns. But what also do we know about investments that have a higher expected return? They tend to also have a risk premium, right? Whether that's volatility in the market, whether that's leverage, whether that's the illiquid nature of the investment. So there tends to be, higher risk premiums as well. And you've heard me say on the show that crawl before you walk before you run. And Jason put the same idea forward. He actually put some time frames around it where, he started first getting aware of financial independence. He started executing on the ideas. And then eventually where he raised the complexity in his financial position with some real estates and syndications and things like that. So point number 3, a simple plan can be a highly effective plan. Go ahead, pour the strong foundation there, and then build with more complex investments if necessary. So with that, look, thanks for joining today's episode, and we'll see you on the next show.
Thank you for joining this episode of Pilot's Portfolio. If you found this information helpful, spread the word and share it with a Pilot buddy. Or if you have questions and there's something that you would like to hear discussed on the show, send us an email. You can find the address in the show notes. For those of you who are ready to learn how we help professional pilots with their financial planning needs, schedule an appointment. Until next time, keep the shiny side up, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Pilot's Portfolio is hosted by Timothy P. Pope. Timothy P. Pope is principal owner of 360 Aviation Advisors. 360 Aviation Advisors is a registered investment advisory firm regulated by the state of North Carolina in accordance and compliance to the securities laws and regulations. 360 Aviation Advisors does not render or offer to render personalized investment or tax advice through Pilot's Portfolio. The information provided is for informational purposes only and may not be suitable for all investors and does not constitute financial, tax, investment, or legal advice. All investments involve a degree of risk, including the risk of loss.